Welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is Hal Niedzviecki, who is the author of Trees on Mars, Our Obsession with the Future. This is a fascinating read. The author is one of North America's smartest and most explosive contrarians. He's a writer, speaker, and cultural commentator known for challenging preconceptions and exploring the new patterns of the tech-infused everyday life. He's the author of 3 previous books of nonfiction, including The Peep Diaries, How We're Learning to Love Watching Ourselves and Our Neighbors, and Hello, I'm Special, How Individuality Became Nonconformity. The Peep Diaries was made into a television documentary entitled Peep Culture, produced for the CBC and shown at festivals and on television in 6 countries. Niedzviecki's articles on contemporary life have appeared in newspapers, periodicals, and journals across the world, including the New York Times Magazine, Playboy, the Globe, and the Mail. He serves as a publisher and fiction editor for The Broken Pencil, a seminal indie culture publication that he founded in '95, and he grew up in the suburbs of D.C. and currently lives in Toronto with his wife and 2 daughters. So, Hal, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
This book really captured my interest from the get-go, and it's about the fact that we seem to be obsessed now with capturing or controlling the future.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I mean, this idea that we can somehow own the future or even get to the future is pervasive in our culture now, and I thought it was worth investigating in exactly how we came to this idea and what it means for our society.
Mm-hmm. So there's some entrepreneurship efforts going on to try and get people to innovate, and a lot of prizes associated with that to kind of stir this innovation up a little bit. Let's talk about some of those.
Sure. Well, we have the X Prize, which is perhaps the best-known prize, where they started off with a prize to fly someone to the moon and back, and whoever the first team that would do that would win millions of dollars. In the Trees on Mars book, I talk about the Tricorder Prize, which is also part of under this X Prize entity, in which the first team to develop a Star Trek-like tricorder, which you could sort of hover over somebody and get their vital signs and other health information, would again be the recipient of millions of dollars. And this format has spread now so that all kinds of foundations and organizations and the U.S. government and other governments around the world are all adopting this idea that they will solve a problem by offering a prize, and the first person or team that solves this problem, usually through some sort of technological, quote-unquote, innovation, will earn millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. And the tricorder thing, of course, stimulates the excitement of all of us Trekkies. But
that's right.
The word innovation you just brought up. You cited how many times that word is used in certain business plans. They seem to be obsessed with that word.
Yeah, I mean, this is the big buzzword of our time: innovation, and even going further, disruption, which is another word you hear a lot in technology circles. The idea that you have to sort of disrupt the current way that people do things in order to really achieve the full impact of any innovation, and that this should be the goal, that we should be in a kind of endless cycle of disruption until we reach, I don't know exactly, we reach perfection, I guess, technological perfection. So when we look at these prizes and we put them in the context of this, the idea is that the business cycle right now, the cycle of research at universities, the way government does things, it's just too slow, and we're not getting to the future fast enough. So if we can jumpstart it with, say, one of these contests, or a overall ideology that puts so-called disruption as the first priority of any government or corporation or even a human being, then we're going to be doing a lot better. We're going to win the future, and that that's the idea. That's what's out there right now.
Yeah, I do want to discuss more about how institutions get in the way, but let's go to the disruption term for a minute. You mentioned Royal Dutch Shell has a 12-person unit called Game Changer to make one thing happen, and that's to identify potentially disruptive business ideas and to figure out what's going to happen before it happens.
Right. So more and more corporate entities are adopting this idea that they need a disruption team that's going to push new technologies and new ideas ahead, be kind of lean and mean and cut through the bureaucracy. And Royal Dutch Shell, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, has this, but a lot of smaller companies also have this. So everyone is trying to kind of replicate the myth of Silicon Valley, the idea of Steve Jobs and his buddies in a garage, or Bill Gates, just sort of fiddling around and coming up with the PC. Everyone has this idea now that it will be single or small groups of kind of entrepreneur-minded inventors who are going to come up with the next so-called disruption. And basically, even giant companies now want to try to have a startup mentality embedded inside their organization.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's another one that mentioned in the book that I find interesting, and it's from a parts manufacturer in Houston or Michigan, I guess. And let me just quote this piece. The perpetually young, plugged-in populace 2.0 has instant access to everything, from a total scan of their genetic code to the best beaches in Thailand to the best-informed sentiments behind economic shifts. You can't be laid off. You knew to leave the company 5 years ago. There doesn't seem to be anything that looks like stability or loyalty to anything that's institutional.
That's a quote where I'm sort of describing the new attitude around how people are now expected to kind of become change agents and be ahead of the future. And the argument that is being put forward is that everybody today should be some kind of futurist. We should be thinking 5-10 years ahead. We shouldn't count on institutions to be around to take care of us. It's all about our own individual ability to know what's coming and get ready for it before it happens, so that we aren't left behind. So in that passage you read, which is a little bit facetious, the idea is basically that the futurist says, well, we have all the information we could ever want at our fingertips, and there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be thinking this way, thinking as futurists. And when I say we, I mean sort of, everyone in America could potentially be a futurist thinker. And this is where problems start to arise. I mean, let's be clear. This book is a critique of this ideology. It's not a book that cheerleads the arrival of this kind of attitude. Most books that have come out are very much in favor of this. How to disrupt. How can you be more innovative? Top 10 innovators. These are the kinds of books that we see on the shelves right now. But for me, there's a lot of problems that come out of this. The main one being that human beings are not actually inherently innovators. We have developed social structures, governments, bureaucracies, even corporations, and we've developed these things because we want stability. We want the ability to control change so that it doesn't disrupt our lives. And the way that we are sweeping aside institutions and dismissing them in order to supposedly get to innovation and disruption faster is very problematic for our society and for individuals on a personal level.
Yeah, I don't want to miss that point at all, and I want to contrast our thinking today with tribal cultures. But before we do, I want to explore just a little bit of some of these innovative, or what this drive to control the future has done in terms of some of the technologies that are being developed and used, particularly to, before we even get to the companies, let's talk about what schools are teaching, because I found it really interesting as I was reading. This is the first notion I got that this wasn't a wholehearted endorsement of future thinking. Was it? We talked about the kids in school who were getting iPads and computers, and then we compared their learning outcomes in math and verbal skills with kids that didn't have that advantage.
So when I say that we are becoming obsessed with future and we are turning a lot of our energy institutionally and personally on getting to the future or winning the future, I mean this literally. This isn't sort of an abstract argument. And to make that point, I investigate what's happening in the schools. And we see, first of all, there is this movement to give every kid in, say, the Los Angeles county area, millions of children, an iPad or a tablet. And the idea being that some of these kids, because they come from poorer areas, may be left behind from the technological revolution and not able to get with the program of future. So I'm investigating this. I'm reading about this. I'm talking to people involved in this, and then I say, well, if we're giving every kid, millions of kids all over the U.S., this isn't confined just to the Los Angeles area, we're giving them all tablets or iPads, there must be some evidence that there is an improved outcome educationally. But in fact, all the studies show that when we give an entire school system a tablet or even a laptop, the outcome drops. They actually do better without these devices on standardized testing of their reading comprehension, their math skills, and so forth. So why are we giving them these items? It's because we're obsessed with the future, and we're sweeping away rationality to pursue this idea that technology can solve all our problems. And we see this not just in primary school and high school, but then we move into the university level, where tons and tons of universities across the U.S. And colleges are coming up with new programs of study. They're putting out new slogans. They'll say, the degree is in disruption. Or Brigham Young University in Utah started an entire new liberal arts studies program, Humanities Plus. So you don't just study the humanities, you study the humanities plus entrepreneurship and innovation. And this is just one example of all kinds of new programs of study in which we sort of pitch the students as come to our university and you can earn degrees in disruption and innovation, and this will position you to be a change agent and get to the future first. The problem being, of course, John, that it's not entirely clear what these programs teach, if anything,
Right.
and we are replacing the study of what we know with the idea that we can somehow teach creativity and change and getting to the future first. And so we're saying, forget about what we know. What you need to learn is how to figure out what we don't know and get to that, which I think is a pretty bizarre thing to try to teach.
Yeah, it's heartening as an educator to hear you say this, because we're facing a lot of things like the MOOC programs where there's massive online education by lectures, on the computer, on video, and people talking about how you don't need a degree. You mentioned Dale Stevens' book, Hacking Your Education, Ditch the Lecture, Save Tens of Thousands, and Learn More Than Your Peers Ever Will.
Right.
That pulling out a textbook is just not a good thing to do anymore. So there's this attitude that education needs to fundamentally shift its focus to this obsession with the future. Not sure what the impact of that has been, right?
Yeah, I mean, we see this attitude, and we see, for instance, at Stanford, which is in the sort of ground zero of Silicon Valley, and there's immense excitement, and by far the most studied program there is computer science. So that's where people go to major in computer science. And at Stanford, 45% of the faculty teach the humanities. But only 10% of the students bother to take their classes. So you can see how this has plummeted the interest in studying what has happened, and trying to get a comprehensive sense of what humanity is all about. That's been swept away in this rhetoric and this fervor. And it's very problematic, and especially since skills like computer science are so incredibly narrow, and the idea that you're going to graduate and be swooped up by a startup or Google or Facebook and you'll be set for life is one that it's not at all clear that even that is a secure thing, as we make so many inroads with computer learning, and a lot of experts are saying that programming itself will be done fairly automatically, sometime in the next 20 years. So you're going to have your computer science degree, but no one's going to need programmers. And I think this is a real possibility. And what we will need are people who are capable of charting the path of humanity, of restoring community and understanding how we got to where we got. And I don't think that we're really, we're definitely not emphasizing those aspects of our education system. It's all about getting rich first, and you sold your amazing startup to Mark Zuckerberg for $1 billion, and who's going to be next? Who wants to get in line to be next for this success?
Yeah, right. Well, I want to touch on two of the manifestations of that obsession, and then I want to shift gears and talk about what you say the risk is, or how perilous this is. But the data harvest chapter was really interesting about this ESRI company doing all this data mining to deal with everything from marketing products to people to get them to buy faster to, basically Minority Report kind of crime investigation almost. So you had some interesting interviews there.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture here is that we are so obsessed with the future that we are empowering corporations and governments to access massive amounts of data, trillions of data points every day, phone calls, GPS records, credit cards, basically everything that makes a digital footprint is collected and organized and sold in some way. And the goal of this, the reason that we allow this, is because it's the future. It tells us theoretically the future. It's about getting to the future. It's technology. If somebody was going to come to your house every day and take a few pennies, you would say, "Well, that's an outrage."
Right.
But if someone takes a few pennies worth of your data every day and resells it, and for instance resells it to companies that go to, you mentioned ESRI, which is a California-based company that essentially provides data mapping for other companies and governments. So a police department might go there and say, we want to use predictive policing. We want to know who is likely to commit crimes before they happen, where these crimes could happen, when, and ESRI accesses all the data sources that I've just mentioned, whether it's weather, GPS records, credit card statements, general movement, crime data going back for decades, and they map it, and they can show you people and places and times of day and times of year where there might be rises in crime, and this can become very specific or it can be relatively general, and this kind of thing it empowers the idea that we can somehow own the future, that we can know what's going to happen and then manipulate that knowledge to create superior outcomes. And at the same time, it's not true.
Right. Yeah.
So it doesn't really have very much of a positive impact, but it does provide a lot of kind of imbalance in our society. So a corporation can use this information to target customers like never before. And the customer is providing massive amounts of information. And when I say customer, I should say people, citizens, individuals, because we're not just customers.
Right, very good.
But, we're providing this information without even knowing it. So this is where the power imbalance comes around. And when we do find out that we're providing it, we sort of shrug because it is put into the context of well, this is the future. You're helping us get to the future, and who wants to hold that back?
Right, and while there's an awful lot of rhetoric around the idea that if we are a consumer society, then increasing what consumers get more of what they want sounds good, and even the other ESRI functions like forestry and agriculture provide benefits in terms of growth cycles and that sort of thing. There's still this issue, for example, in the criminal investigation of increasing profiling and kinds of things that violate civil liberties, right?
That's right, and civil rights as well. I mean, I was recently reading an article that used this kind of predictive policing to pull specific individuals in that said, we've run the data, and the data shows that you are very likely to commit a crime in the near future.
Right.
And so we're pulling you in here to tell you this and asking you to straighten things out. And so on the surface, this seems like perhaps a good idea, but in practice, it is stigmatizing people who haven't actually done anything yet.
Right.
And it's getting us to a very kind of thought policey place. But the book doesn't really, I'm not that concerned about this information being used to kind of lock us down. I think the bigger question is really on that consumer side, where we are spending so much energy figuring out what people are going to buy before they even know it. And we're doing so under the rubric of advancing the future. But this is not innovation. This is not the introduction of something new. This is just pinpoint advertising. It's the dream come true of Madison Avenue.
Right.
Where every single person can be marketed individually. And look, the world is burning, and this is what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one more scary thought before we flip it over, and that is the personal cyber consciousness movement to kind of preserve life through implanting human intelligence and emotions in technology and computers, in cyborgs, I guess, among other things. Right?
Yeah. Well, there's this idea that we can live forever. And get to the end of the future when we are able to either merge with our machines, and this is something that is described as the singularity by the very popular thinker Ray Kurzweil, who believes we will achieve this singularity, man-machine merge, perhaps as early as 2045 or so. And once we do this, we will live forever, and we will essentially have everything we want, because we will be mostly living virtual lives. And so, a virtual life is limitless. You can go anywhere, do anything you want. And so this is in fact, it sounds like kind of a science fiction, a little bit crazy, fantastical idea, but in fact it's very popular, and millions and billions of dollars are being invested in these ideas, and to me, they are essentially anti-human.
Right.
And even if they can be achieved, which is very doubtful,
Right.
even if they are achieved, what is the point of this? What is the point of this for me is to create a kind of consumerist paradise where we're all just lying on comfy sofas, being fed grapes, and I'm not sure what kind of life this would lead for humanity, but I'm pretty sure it's not the life that I would want to live. While we have finite lives, and there are certainly tragedies, and everyone wishes that we could live longer or reverse death. Death is also part of being human.
Right.
And to take that away from us is to take away humanity. And I think that to do this, to believe that this is somehow the natural order of things, that we must use technology to conquer aging and bring about the end of time,
right.
At which point we have reached the future, which is ironically the end of future, because if we live forever in bubbles of virtual perfection, there is no time. We enter a zone of nothingness that I don't personally value that. I mean, that's among one of many critiques that I make of this idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, the obsession with the future wasn't always part of humanity, according to what you write. In the tribal cultures, they didn't even have a past, present, future. You mentioned a tribe in the Amazon that didn't even have a word for time, and lived by the circle of life and the cycles that are available to us in nature, as opposed to, what we seem to do now with our obsession with past and future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the big critique that I often receive when I talk about this is, well, haven't human beings always sought the future? Haven't we always tried to know what the future is and tried to shape the future through technology? We invented fire and then the wheel, and we've been on this long road to progress. That's the conventional idea. The only problem, John, is that it isn't true. When we look at the history of humanity, we see that for most of time, in the millions of years, well, not that many millions of years that human beings have wandered the earth, what people have wanted and what they have sought is continuity, social certainty, as the Spanish philosopher Daniel Innerarity writes. And what this means essentially is that people did not see life as past, present, and future. They saw it all as one continuity in which you moved in a circle, and so you what you wanted was to wake up the next day and life would pretty much go on as it always had, whether you were there or not. If you died tomorrow, you understood that this was the way it had to be. You would be replaced. Your society would go on. The functions that you fulfilled would continue, and your life had meaning in the preservation of your community. Now it's all about the individual conquest of time and to displace, to burst out of the circle so that you become irreplaceable. It's a very different conception. In the 4.5 million years that people have lived on the earth, or so, humanoids have wandered the earth. Most of that time, we didn't change very much, and it's only until we kind of hit the Industrial Revolution that we start to see a really a very profound change in how we think. And before that, most people had no sense of time. When I say most people, I mean most people on the planet. They did not tell time. They did not read. They had a completely different conception of what life was about. Once we hit the Industrial Revolution and the machine era enters full swing and starts touching the lives of most people on the planet, then we start to think about progress and the idea that each new level of technological change is inevitably progress. And this is tied in with consumerism, with capitalism, with the spread of easily made, mass-produced consumer goods. Who can ever say that more isn't better?
Yes, right.
It's a very hard thing to tell people. This machine can make more, and so we say, well, that must be progress,
right.
and that's really that's the big shift. I can go on about this. I can give you more examples of contrasts, but let me know if you want more on this one.
Well, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I do want to point out that at the end of this thought-provoking book, Trees on Mars, you cite Viktor Frankl, who found meaning for life in Auschwitz, and that we need to be striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal that's freely chosen. You cite Robert Jensen about keeping some aspect of our humanity intact, and I think that's a great epilogue for this fabulous book, Trees on Mars. We've been talking with Hal Niedzviecki. The book is Trees on Mars, Our Obsession with the Future. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.